all of that intricate process of the up and the down of the sex hormones affects so much more than your reproductive system. It affects your entire body. It affects your energy levels, your ability to even how you think, your mood, so many other things. Can you walk us through, and we're going to get into come back to birth control pills, because I think that's incredibly important, but laying this baseline is so key. And again, this is stuff that I think most women should be taught. I think all women should be taught. Most women aren't taught from young ages. And I do think our medical system treats women like men without understanding these core differences. And that's why this is so key, what you're doing. So thank you. But walk us through those different stages of our cycle and what impact that has then on our mood, our emotions, and why when you went off the birth control pill and you're going through the whole cycle now, you said everything became more alive, it became more vivid. You like picked up music that you hadn't listened to in a long time. It felt like you were a new person.
Yeah, I mean, our whole body is wired to be sensitive to sex hormones. So again, we've trivialized hormones as just being, relegated to only being important when it comes to reproduction, or only being important in terms of figuring out whether or not you need to buy tampons or not. But the fact is, our entire body from head to toe is wired to be sensitive to sex hormones, meaning that the cells in our body from head to toe change what they do in response to our different hormones. And this is necessary because the entire female body has to totally reorganize itself in order to be pregnant. And just to give an example of this, like the immune system, for example, it can't just do its normal day-to-day activities when women's bodies are preparing for pregnancy, because the immune system is designed to attack things that are genetically non-self, right? And especially things that are genetically non-self that are then siphoning resources out of the body, right? And this obviously has an awful lot in common with an embryo. And because of this, the female body, when progesterone is being released, again, this hormone that's orienting our body toward being optimized for implantation and pregnancy, it taps the brakes on the immune system, right? So it shifts our immune system. It shifts our cardiovascular system, because our body has to work harder when it's preparing for the possibility of pregnancy, because if an embryo implants, it's going to have to be the blood supply both for itself and for the embryo. And what we see is that respiration rate and heart rate increase in the second half of the cycle. So our cardiovascular system and our respiratory system are sensitive to sex hormones. We also see that mood is sensitive to sex hormones. And so we know, for example, that when women are in the phase of the cycle that's dominated by progesterone, so during the luteal phase, that last 2 weeks of the menstrual cycle, that women's brains become more easily primed for fear. We become more vigilant. And what this means is that our brain actually lowers the threshold on what it considers to be a threat before it starts sounding the alarm bells. So normally when we're not in the luteal phase, we might, get some input that's potentially diagnostic of there being a social threat. But our brain says, oh, don't worry about it. It's probably fine. In the luteal phase, the exact same stimulus can cause the alarm bells to sound, because our brain is designed for vigilance during this period when our body is preparing for pregnancy, and the possibility that it's not just being scared for itself, it's being scared for its, this protecting this embryo and this fetus and this child. And we know that this happens, and this is one of the reasons that when women are in the last two weeks of the menstrual cycle, that many women experience changes in mood, and some of them can experience things like anxiety because of the changing threshold that our brain has for detecting threats. And it does this on purpose because pregnancy is a time when women are incredibly vulnerable. It's and when we consider the historical context in which these tendencies were inherited by our ancestors, women were even more dependent on their male partners in particular for provisioning and protection than we are even currently. And so it makes sense that women's brains are going to be really vigilant toward potential threats, because they really need to make sure that they're maintaining the integrity of their relationship, because they're going to be so dependent, or they're in a greater state of dependency to their partner for provisioning and protection, particularly when they're preparing for pregnancy. And so all of this is simply to say that, pretty much everything in our body is sensitive to our shifting sex hormones. And this is true when it comes to our emotional states. It's true when it comes to sexual desire. We know that sexual desire peaks when estrogen is high in the cycle, when conception is possible. Sexual desire then falls in the second half of the cycle when progesterone is the primary sex hormone, and sex can no longer lead to conception. We know that it changes the way that women's bodies can respond to medication that helps to support their health across the cycle. So, just to give an example of this, we know that women who have asthma tend to have their symptoms controlled less well in the second half of the cycle compared to the first half of the cycle because of changes that you get in what's called respiratory drive in the second half of the cycle. Because again, your body is preparing for the possibility of pregnancy, which means that it needs more oxygen and more energy to, again, you're building this endometrial layer. And this means that as your respiratory drive increases and your need for breath increases, that this is going to shift women's experiences of asthma symptoms. And many women find that their symptoms aren't as well controlled in the second half of the cycle compared to the first half of the cycle. And the list goes on. There's so many ways that our sex hormones affect our brains and our bodies. And so much of it has been completely underappreciated by science and by medicine, which has just given women, either one size fits all sets of recommendations for what their bodies need that don't fit a cyclical female, since women's bodies needs change across the cycle, or the recommendations that are based on men, right? And again, this is where we're
Who have just
taking
mostly just it's a consistent sex hormone level that men have. I mean, obviously there's when they work out more, they're going to experience higher testosterone, things like that, but they're not going through a cycle like women are on a monthly basis, obviously.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. And the reason that men only need to have one sex hormone is that their bodies only need to do one thing to reproduce. And so they don't need to cycle. The whole reason that we cycle in the first place is because our bodies have to do two different and very distinct sets of activities in order to reproduce. And so, for men, you can give them one size fits all guidelines for like nutrition, for example, and tell men you need X number of calories a day. And that will generally apply to men, plus or minus how much exercise they did. But for a woman, for example, where you do get changes in even resting metabolic rate that happen across the cycle, if you tell a woman you need to eat X number of calories a day, that might be true for the first half of the menstrual cycle, but it's not going to be true for the second half of the menstrual cycle, or vice versa, because we know that in the luteal phase, that women's resting metabolic rate increases by 7 to 11%, which means an additional 150 to 200 calories a day
That's
that
great.
you need. And that, yeah, and that half of the
This
cycle.
is leading up to your period.
Well, yeah. This is in the week or 2 weeks leading up to your period, you need more calories. So it's really the 2 weeks leading up to your period where your calorie needs increase. And women aren't told about this. And instead, women are told, these one size fits all guidelines for what they're supposed to eat. And then women are going through the second half of their menstrual cycle and feeling like they're having food cravings and that they're hungry all the time, and they're so tired and they're so cranky. And it's because we haven't been giving our bodies what they need, because all that we've been told is, oh, you need X number of calories a day. We aren't told that our energy needs change in response to our hormones. And we're not told about anything that changes in response to our hormones, except in the context of pregnancy and then getting our periods. But it's so much more than that. Like our sex hormones, as they cycle, it does change our body and it changes our brain in ways that are very functional and are very much they're just an essential part of being female. The female experience is one that's characterized by these cycling hormones. And so, not understanding that can really create problems and lead women to feel disordered, especially in the second half of the menstrual cycle, since much of the guidance that women have been given for how to take care of their bodies and what their bodies and their brains need has either been based on men or based on women in the first half of the cycle, when women's bodies are most similar to that of a man. And that means that many of the recommendations and much of the guidance that we've been given doesn't always fit for the second half of the cycle, leading so many women to experience feelings of disorder during this time.
You know how much I love and support EveryLife.com, America's only pro-life diaper company, and also its fastest growing diaper company. Well, now the great team over at EveryLife has officially launched something new. They've created EveryLife Women, a clean, premium feminine care line designed to honor women the way God intended. No harsh ingredients, no toxins, just products that reflect dignity and the truth of who we are as women. You can try EveryLife's new feminine care brand, EveryLife Women, with my code Lila for 10% off your order. Visit everylife.com/Lila to shop now and use the code Lila at checkout.